Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who has joined us online or will late watch this video. Welcome to this new session of the Geneva Nature-based Solution Dialogues, co-convened by the Geneva Environment Network and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which we refer to as Iucn. As I keep reminding in these dialogues, Iucn, headquartered in our region, is an essential global actor of our network, bringing together the world's most influential organizations and experts to conserve nature and accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. We have again the pleasure to have with us today leading experts from their network. These nature-based solutions dialogues aim to facilitate further engagement and discussion among the stakeholders in International Geneva and beyond on the role and opportunities provided by nature-based solutions in the lead-up to major environmental negotiations. Today, we are hosting the 9th dialogue and we will be focusing on peace building. This week, the first week of November, as it has now been a tradition for a few years, takes place in Geneva, the so-called Geneva Peace Week, mobilizing many actors in Geneva and around the world on this topic. And of course, environment is also on the agenda. Another important event to mention is the second Environment Peacebuilding Conference coming to Geneva in February next year. We have with us today leading experts who have been regularly engaged in the hosting and in the preparations of these events, and they will be speaking on the key role of nature-based solutions in this context. We'll also be welcoming our key moderator today is Ada Moza, Forum Deputy Manager at Iucn, who is very engaged with the Geneva Environmental Peacebuilding Cluster and will be moderating today's session. Let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the dialogue will be made available on the webpage of this event. We will share the link in the chat. Throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. We will use your questions to feed the discussion after the presentations. And with that, Anna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Diana. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all who have joined us. A very warm welcome to all our distinguished panelists, as well as all of you connected online. It is my pleasure to be serving as your moderator today for this timely dialogue. Now, before introducing the panelists, I'd like to just spend a few moments setting the stage for all of us on nature-based solutions and peace building as we move into this dialogue. So what are nature-based solutions? At the 2016 World Conservation Congress in Hawaii, Iucn members adopted a resolution that defined nature-based solutions as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively to provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. Nature-based solutions offer the potential to help address critical global challenges such as climate change, human health, food and water security, natural disasters, and biodiversity loss in a holistic manner, one that is grounded in the ecosystem approach and in a way that benefits both people and nature. Governments, communities, businesses, and NGOs are increasingly embracing the NBS approach. At the same time, however, increased demand and the use of NBS has also led to misunderstanding and misuse of the concept and applications that cause harm to biodiversity and communities. In response to the need for a standardized approach, in July 2020, Iucn launched the Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions, a tool to help governments, communities, businesses, and NGOs to implement strong, effective nature-based solutions projects that are ambitious in scale and sustainable, that prevent misuse and safeguard both people and planet. The standard is the first set of coherent guidance on how to design and implement nature-based solutions. It is a crucial step in increasing clarity and precision as to what nature-based solutions encompass and how it can be successfully implemented. And it also acts as a framework for learning how to improve nature-based solutions and sharing this knowledge globally in a structured manner. The standard comprises 8 key criteria. So these 8 key criteria for the peace building context, there are two that are particularly critical, which are important for our discussions today. Criterion 5 and Criterion 8. Criterion 5 requires that nature-based solutions acknowledge, involve, and respond to the concerns of a variety of stakeholders, particularly rights holders. Participation is based on mutual respect and equality, regardless of gender, age, or social status, and it requires upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent. Criterion 8 requires that NBS interventions are designed and managed with a view to long-term sustainability, and that they take care and account for, work with, and align with sectoral, national, and other policy frameworks. Where relevant, NBS interventions should contribute to national and global targets for human well-being, climate change, biodiversity, and human rights, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So what connects nature-based solutions to peace and conflict and environmental peacebuilding? Well, the interconnections between conflict, nature, and the environment have long been studied now and continue to be further researched and detailed. The linkages between conflict and nature and natural resources are not unidirectional, but go both ways. And the relationships between nature and conflict are many, they are varied, they are complex, and they are scale dependent. We see natural resources intertwined across the conflict cycle. So where does environmental peacebuilding fit into all of this? Environmental peacebuilding exists at the intersection of peace, conflict, and the natural world. Environmental peacebuilding integrates natural resource management in conflict prevention, mitigation, resolution, and recovery to build resilience in communities affected by conflict. So what are the opportunities for nature-based solutions in peacebuilding efforts? Nature-based solutions offer immense potential to contribute to sustainable development and peace throughout the conflict cycle. By protecting the environment, nature-based solutions can contribute to address and prevent conflict-linked environmental damage, as well as combat the risk of resource crisis resulting from conflict, particularly in the face of future climate stresses. So here, what we have done is an attempt to capture the various areas of work where IUCN is engaging at the intersection of nature conservation, peace, conflict, and environmental peacebuilding work. Now, of course, this just reflects a couple of the myriad areas of work where we can find these linkages and interconnections. And here you see that through our diverse range of programs and projects being implemented by all parts of the Union, including the Secretariat, the commissions, and our member organizations, we are constantly working at this intersection of interconnected environment, nature, and peace and conflict issues, and trying to demonstrate the potential opportunities for nature-based solutions to contribute to peace-building efforts. Here you see a few examples of cross-cutting areas of work, including on environmental defenders, eco-DRR, protected and conserved areas, natural resource governance and management, and many more. And of course, together with all our other commissions working in these various areas, including various groups and task forces and specialist groups, such as the theme on environment and peace of the Commission on Environmental, Economic, and Social Policy, the Peace, Security, and Conflict Specialist Group of the World Commission on Environmental Law, and the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group of the World Commission on Protected Areas. And here, just a brief overview of IUCN's work over the past couple of years in this area. Of course, IUCN's work in this field goes back many, many years, and we will be hearing more from our colleagues on the panel on this in just a few moments. But I wanted to highlight a few specific reports and collaborative projects which are currently ongoing. Most notably, in April this year, we launched our flagship report on conflict and conservation, which focuses on the relationship between armed conflict and living nature, and proposes a suite of potential policy options which can simultaneously conserve nature and promote peace. In addition, we have a forthcoming report from IUCN's CEASP's theme on environment and peace, which will focus on migration, conflict, and environmental change. And my colleague Elaine will speak more to that during the discussion. We've also been collaborating with the Geneva Peacebuilding platform, Peace Nexus, and the Environmental Peacebuilding Association on a white paper on the future of environmental peacebuilding. And we're collaborating with PAX on NBS and armed conflict in the run-up to UNEA 5.2. And so with that brief overview of NBS and IUCN's work in the field of nature, conflict, and peace, let me now introduce our distinguished panel of experts. First, I would like to introduce Elaine Chow and Galileo Saints. Unfortunately, Galileo, who is scheduled to join us today, is unwell, and so he sends his regrets, and we miss him today, but we hope that many of you can connect with him in future events and correspondence. Elaine is the co-chair of the IUCN Commission on Environmental, Economic, and Social Policy theme on environment and peace. She's currently a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia's Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability, and Elaine's research focuses on critical legal geography and political ecology with security, peace, and conflict studies in the context of conservation. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce Carl Brooke, who is the Director of International Programs at the Environmental Law Institute. Carl, as many of you know, is the founding president of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. With over 25 years of experience, Carl has helped many countries affected by conflict and fragility to more effectively and equitably manage their resources and the environment. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Alexis Canary, who is the co-founder of Hello World, a social enterprise which seeks to democratize learning of languages in Latin America. Alexis was part of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association's Road to Geneva Young Rapporteurs program. She is a master's student in politics and public administration, specializing in international administration and conflict management at the University of Constance in Germany. Next, we have Vim Zweinenberg, who is the Humanitarian Disarmament Project leader at PAX, the largest peace organization in the Netherlands. Vim is also a longtime contributor to the Bellingcat open source investigative collection. His work focuses on emerging military technologies and their impact on how wars are being fought and consequences for arms proliferation. Vim is the coordinator of the European Forum on Armed Drones, which is a network of civil society organizations working to address concerns over the use and proliferation of military drones. And he also works on the environmental dimensions of armed conflict. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce Sanchita Haq, who is a career diplomat from Bangladesh. She's currently serving as Deputy Permanent Representative at the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh to the UN in Geneva. Beyond her experience in multilateral diplomacy, particularly on development issues, she has also worked extensively on human rights and humanitarian affairs, health and labor rights related issues. Sanchita previously served in the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh in New York and the Bangladesh High Commission in New Delhi. Next, we have Ulrika Åkesson, who is the lead policy specialist on environment and climate change for the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. She has 25 years of experience in development cooperation in the areas of environment and climate change. She holds the position as the chair of the OECD's DAX network on environment and development cooperation, EnviroNet. And in 2018, Ulrika was appointed by the DG as one of 5 lead policy specialists for 5 prioritized areas in Swedish development cooperation, with overarching responsibility for the area externally and internally. And finally, I would like to introduce Caroline Segal, who is the Deputy Chair of the IUCN Commission on Environmental, Economic, and Social Policy theme on business, best practices, and accountability. Caroline is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at McGill University in Canada. Her research focuses on human-environment interactions and large-scale mineral extraction in Madagascar. Caroline has a strong interest in rights-based approaches to conservation and environmental justice. As many of you can tell, we have a fantastic panel of experts lined up today to share insights on both the gaps and opportunities for nature-based solutions in the context of peace building, from the national and international to the NGO and donor perspectives. So thank you all for joining us for this exciting conversation. And thank you again to all of you who have connected to be part of this discussion as Geneva Peace Week kicks off today. As we move through the panel, and if you hear something that sparks a question, please do drop it in the Q&A box. As Diana mentioned at the beginning, we will be collecting these questions throughout the panel for our discussion segment later on. And with that, let us move to our first panelist, Elaine. Over to you, Elaine, for your remarks and reflections.
Hannah, thanks for the introductions. You've reminded me I needed to send you an updated bio, so sorry about that. Thank you to Veronica and Diana as well for the invitation to join this webinar panel. I'll just kick right off and start by saying that, as Hannah has described, conservation, I would say, in the Western world has definitely emerged as a response to human-induced environmental changes that have been threatening human and species health, livelihoods, and economies. And today we would call this a nature-based solution. But also, conservation is so deeply linked to survival, relief from suffering, adaptation, and the possibility for many to thrive, that it presents a powerful nature-based solution for peace building or for creating and exacerbating tensions and conflicts between people. In this context, I want to highlight three things. One is that we know that conservation and conservation interests are threatened and impacted in many places by armed conflict or armed violence, and that this has escalated the militarization, securitization, and the weapons use in conservation. In this context, we need to not only give better attention to how humanitarian and peacebuilding efforts and conservation efforts can be mutually supportive, but also to how conservationists, humanitarian, and peacebuilding actors can better support environmental defenders and Indigenous and local communities living in these conflict zones. We need to develop our skills in nonviolent conflict resolution, find more compassionate alternatives to more arms and more tech surveillance, and take a hard look at the violence and conflict inflicted by conservation itself. So those standards that Hannah has mentioned, 5 and 8, especially where they speak to human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples, need to be taken seriously. And secondly, conservation in the world as we know it is going to be dramatically challenged by the forces of migration and displacement in the decades to come. And we need to look at how nature-based solutions can reduce human and non-human displacement, ease the suffering of displaced peoples and other species, as well as address the changing dynamics of human-wildlife conflicts and facilitate ecological regeneration and peaceful integration in places of settlement. When it comes to displacement, conservation can no longer be part of the problem if it wants to be part of the solution. We know that territorially defined and defended protected areas will no longer be the solution, and we need to think about nature-based solutions in longer-term, multi-generational scenarios that are dynamic and adaptive, integrating peace processes in multi-species, more than human ways. And thirdly, on its surface, protection of the environment or conservation through nature-based solutions could foster peace between people, between states, and even between humans and the rest of life on Earth, and play a powerful role in peace building broadly. But this is neither explicit nor automatic, and we cannot assume that because it's called a nature-based solution, peace will follow. Peace by peaceful means must be made explicit in nature-based solutions and operationalized through new forms of capacity building, like training on nonviolent conflict management and respect for human rights, cross-cultural collaborative problem solving, conflict analysis and peace and conflict impact assessments and process tracking, nonviolent communication, the list goes on. But these things are not inherent to conservation. And it is imperative that nature-based solutions are not only conflict sensitive, but also conflict transformative to actually build peace. These issues are at the core of what CEASP's theme on environment and peace have been tackling through its efforts to address conservation conflicts, lead dialogues on nonviolent strategies for conservation in places of armed conflict, including the newest emergence of a community of practice around conservation in conflict zones focused specifically on Indigenous people and local communities. And with the expansion of its humanitarian and development partnerships and the establishment of the task force on migration, environmental change, and conflict, and the collective writing of the upcoming report, Planet on the Move. Environmental peace building emerged from the leadership of key people in CEASP and the Iucn Secretariat. Today, the Iucn's work on nature-based solutions offers an opportunity for the Union to lead again and linking conservation and peace building in very tangible ways. But we must do this mindfully, evolving conventional forms of conservation. So I'll just kick that off and hope that that'll stimulate some interesting conversation for us later on.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I think your remarks really built meaningfully on the introductory, setting the stage, which I started off with, and I think there's some really interesting nuggets there which I'd like to pick up on again in the panel discussion. So many notes taken. Thank you so much for those remarks. And with that, I think it's a really nice segue into Carl's reflections. As you mentioned, the criticality of NBS being both conflict sensitive and conflict transformative. And so I'd like to hand over now to Carl, who is going to focus on adopting a conflict-sensitive approach to nature-based solutions. Over to you, Carl.
Shanna. As a starting point, I think it's important to note that conflict and peace are inherently social. And one of the greatest challenges for nature-based solutions is that many of the leading conservation institutions who are the leaders on nature-based solutions do not have expertise, a mandate, or an inclination to focus on conflict. As a result, many of them are not conflict sensitive, and we have seen some very unfortunate results from this. The Environmental Law Institute conducted an evaluation for the Global Environment Facility of the design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of its projects in fragile and conflict-affected situations. And I think it's very illustrative for today's discussion. The GEF is a major funder of conservation work, including a lot of nature-based solutions. They've supported more than 4,000 projects. 88% of GEF country-level projects occur in fragile environments. And as of July of last year, the GEF had invested $4 billion in countries affected by major armed conflicts. These are so not just fragile, but these are countries that have seen battle deaths in excess of 1,000. This is about a third of the GEF portfolio. When we looked at the effect of conflict and fragility on the performance of GEF projects, we saw that conflict and fragility had a statistically significant impact on a project being canceled or dropped, as well as the increased duration of delays. So this is fairly expected. What we were impressed by or surprised by was that fragility had a statistically significant impact on every performance indicator. And I think one of the most important ones is sustainability. Now, this isn't sustainability as we think of it normally. It's the sustainability of the benefits. After the project is done, do the benefits persist? Or do we just go back to normal? In fragile situations, too often we go back to normal. In other words, you did all that work, spent all that money, and it did not have a lasting impact. Now, it is interesting that the GEF, when we did the analysis, had no policies on conflict sensitivity. They rely on GEF implementing agencies. Only half of the GEF implementing agencies have developed policies, strategies, and toolkits on conflict sensitivity. And I think it's interesting that it's only half, because there are a lot of projects out there that are essentially conflict blind as a result. In the absence of official guidance, implementing agencies have been innovating to meet the needs of their operating environments. And as you can see from the image that will be shown, there are 5 major ways that projects approach conflict sensitivity. First is just acknowledgement. There is a conflict. It doesn't seek to manage the risks associated with conflict, it just acknowledges it. Second is avoidance. Conflict's over here, so we're going to do the project over there, which is maybe good for the project, but if the biodiversity is in a biological hotspot, and that's where the conflict is, and a lot of conflicts are in biological hotspots, doing it away from the conflict isn't going to help that biodiversity. And then there's mitigation, the standard things related to monitoring and evaluation, engagement of communities and local partners. The third, I think, goes to what Dr. Shao was saying, going beyond just managing the risks, but embracing the peace building opportunities. And we see in Colombia, for example, that it's important to engage in the peace building process if you want support. And finally is learning. I will note that the first one is not risk management, it's just acknowledging it. The others, to varying degrees, are trying to manage the risks associated with conflict and fragility. The key point here is that nature-based solutions need to be conflict sensitive if they are to achieve their environmental objectives. If they want to have a direct effect on peace building, I think there are two general approaches. First, they can support the peace process by focusing on particular peace building objectives, livelihoods, basic services, peace dividends. And as I said, Colombia, we've seen this happen. Second, they can seek to transform the conflict, as Dr. Segal was mentioning. And we see that in the Wadi El Ku project that UNEP adopted in Darfur. I'll end my remarks there, but I think that it's important to note that simply because we are doing nature-based solutions in pursuance of peace doesn't mean that we can't have a negative effect on conflict and peace if we're not careful about how we do it.
Thank you so much, Carl, for those remarks. I think we have quite a bit to unpack in the panel coming up, and critically thinking through exactly how we ensure that we're doing nature-based solutions in a way that is not doing more harm than good, and in a way that is indeed conflict sensitive. So thank you for highlighting those 2 points and the ways in which we can pursue nature-based solutions in a meaningful way to have a positive effect on peace building. So much more work to be done on that, and more discussions to be had coming up. So next, I would like to pass on to Alexis, who will be presenting her teaching brief, Healing the Human-Nature Relationship, Youth Perspectives on Positive Peace, which was part of the outcomes of the Iucn Global Youth Summit. And the Iucn Global Youth Summit was a 10-day fully virtual event which took place back in April in the lead up to Congress, and we welcomed over 10,000 young people from around the world for this event. So Alexis was instrumental in the outcomes process and the Youth Speak Labs. And so Alexis, over to you for your reflections.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you for the invitation to be today here in this panel. Well, I would like today to share with you some of the outcomes from the Iucn, as Hannah mentioned it, but focusing on how young people is already integrating positive peace in conservation actions. I decided to develop this brief because I noticed that during this whole event that young people are already working in creating positive peace or sustainable peace. And it is important to say that because we are not only accepting that peace is only the absence of direct violence, but rather we are working to deconstruct structural situations and relationships that cause harm or conflict with, for example, with nature. And also we are trying to develop actions and initiatives on the ground with the presence of equity, justice, and sustainability. Young people showed, and I include myself, a clear understanding of the urgent need to restore meaningful relationship between human and non-human beings for reaching positive peace. Another point is young people is really looking to move from this anthropocentric approach, really human-centered approach, to a more ecocentric approach, and to also have environmental ethics in all the actions that we are trying to develop. Of course, that is not a surprise because the human dominant relationship with nature has more than reached its limits, and we are now having these all ecological environmental damages as a global security. It's also important to remark that this positive peace make possible to build more resilient societies that can face not only current challenges, but also future challenges that for sure we will have. Here there are some key priorities from the Iucn Global Youth Summit. I want to say that this document that I'm explaining now is only one of 10 policy briefs that other amazing colleagues also developed after this event. Some of the key priorities from the Iucn event. First of all, we really talk a lot about the necessity to build a more transformative and inclusive education. If we really want to reach sustainable peace, we need to make possible that other actors participate. And unfortunately, the mainstream education fails in incorporating environmental and ecological citizenship. Not all people are aware, for example, of all these big challenges. Another point that we highlighted is that we have a really huge digital divide and also linguistic barriers. We are losing a huge opportunity to have more voices from around the world in the discussion tables to do it to these, for example, language barriers. We realize that English is not the language of conservation, and we as young we are hoping that there will be more spaces where people can feel comfortable to share their ideas in a safe place. The second point that I would like to connect to this first point is like when we are trying to build this transformative and inclusive education, we are also giving a space for create a community that accept the right of others. I will just highlight two main points. To accept the rights of nature, recognizing that humans and not human beings equally deserve rights and freedom, and also the rights of indigenous communities and ethnic minorities, because unfortunately, they have really few legal protection. And it can be really connected to the protection for environmental activists, for example, that are being assassinated in different countries. And the second point is also that when we are trying to implement solutions, we think that we need to respect the other cosmovisions from other communities. This will allow us to create a more holistic solution and also to stop this kind of oppression that exists, unfortunately, nowadays in our world. Another point that I would like to highlight is that during the summit, young people were really eager to share their time and also their professional skills to support conservation. But unfortunately, because these problems are going really fast, they don't find this necessary mentorship or funding to develop these new projects or new ideas. So I would like to, in this point, congratulate the efforts from the Iucn Academy that are trying to incorporate many professionals into the conservation field, so they can actually use all their skills to help to build a more peaceful world along with nature. And well, the last point that I would like to remark is that we also talk a lot about the importance of intergenerational renewal, for example, for having, for example, a better, when we talk about, for example, food security, we saw that, for example, smallholder farmers are key into the food security, but unfortunately they are not receiving a lot of resources or opportunities. And it is important that we give them their space and the value that they need, because this reinforce that or help that more young people will continue working in these areas. So I would like to stop there, but I would like to go deeper in these points after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. I think you've highlighted the main critical points which emerged from our summit. And so absolutely, I think the transformative education, inclusivity, and the digital divide are definitely areas which we do need to discuss in further detail. So hoping and looking forward to some exchange on that during the panel together with our other panelists. Next, I would like to welcome Vim. Vim will be speaking to us on the impact of conflict on the environment. Vim, over to you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks everyone for joining in this session. It's great to see so much interest on this topic. My name is Vim Zweinenberg. I work for PAX, which is a Dutch peace organization, and we've been working on the environmental dimensions of armed conflict over the last 10 years. And over the last 6 years, we've been working to improve data collection and monitoring to demonstrate how damage to the environment has an impact on civilians, and to include this in the agenda on protection of civilians and protection of the environment. And today I want to take an opportunity to learn from this lesson what we've done over the last couple of years and trying to look for solutions. So as we've seen and also heard from previous speakers, we've seen that the impacts of conflict on the environment has serious implications for human health, for lives, for livelihoods and ecosystems. And through novel research methods, what we've been trying to build over these last years, like using remote sensing data, open source information, we're trying to build a more coherent picture and on a more granular level of how those impacts happen and what should be done to address those impacts through either UN advocacy in United Nations Environment Assembly, the UN Security Council, or through supporting work by the ICRC and other international organizations who've been building policies on that. And what we've come across in our work is, every conflict has a unique features that where environmental challenges are posing those kind of environmental security risk for people. And we've also seen, for example, looking at Syria, where we've seen massive destruction of oil infrastructure, deforestation in Western Syria. In Iraq, we also have seen oil fires, damage to nature reserves and areas, impacts on agriculture, and larger problems around solid waste management and general collapse of environmental governance. It has both acute risk for people and long-term risk for ecosystems and also for climate resilience. And when the topic of nature-based solutions was raised in the discussions leading up to UNIA, we felt like this is a great example of demonstrating that we don't not only see those kind of impacts and the negative consequences for peoples and for societies, but also to think around like, okay, how can we address those kind of issues? And often the environment is sort of the last priority in post-conflict remediation and post-conflict reconstruction efforts, like depending on how much funding there is, depending on states' priorities in supporting this kind of work. And yet at the same time, we do see there are opportunities to address this already, either through humanitarian response work or by supporting local groups or civil society groups. For example, in Syria, Northeast Syria, where we work with environmental and civil society groups who really express the need to address this. Similar things we see in Iraq, we see it in Yemen, we see it in Ukraine, we see it in other conflict areas around the world. So how can we use nature-based solutions or more broader actions for nature? Because it's not always nature-based solutions, but it can also be similar examples. And I want to run through some kind of examples we've come across in addressing this and trying to demonstrate this. And this is where, for example, in Iraq, if we take the broad example of actions for nature, where UNEP is currently working using bacteria to clean up oil pollution from the 20 oil wells that have been burning for 8 months that has contaminated soil and rivers. In Bangladesh, we're seeing restoration project taking place in camps by refugees from the conflict there. Already mentioned earlier in Colombia, there are collaborative tools being implemented in communities which are affected by the conflict. There's a list of examples like from Sudan and wider issues where water sources are problematic and people do share resource management around that. We can also take a look at green humanitarian response and dealing with debris from cities and building back greener and better in urban areas affected by conflict, and where we can try to find solutions for how to deal with waste management, debris management, restoration, use of natural resources for reconstruction efforts, and rebuilding spaces, urban spaces in general, where I think there are definitely key challenges which can be addressed through nature-based solutions or broader actions for nature. And I think it's very important also leading up to UNIA 5.2 starting next year that states take up this challenge and include this in discussions around dealing with nature and conflict in relevant resolutions. And we can probably hopefully talk a bit more around that later. And I'll leave it at this, and hopefully can we have a more discussion on it in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vim. Thanks for those practical examples on actions for nature and for actually highlighting that difference between NBS versus broader actions for nature. I think that's really a critical piece which we should also pick up on in the discussions in terms of the knowledge around nature-based solutions and what they practically mean in the field versus broader actions for nature, which also contribute positively. So thank you for those remarks. Next, I would like to hand over to Shanchita to share her experience and efforts in terms of nature-based solutions for the purpose of peace building. Shanchita, over to you.
At the outset, I would like to thank Iucn for organizing the webinar on this very important topic and inviting Bangladesh Mission in Geneva to take part in the event. From the presentation of the previous panelists, we have a very good idea that the relation between natural resources and peace building is complex and multifaceted. Inequality in access to natural resources as well as its management undermines welfare, affects human security, and creates a risk of conflict. And peace-building activities, on the other hand, do not only aim to end conflict, but also create structures that contribute to a just and sustaining peace. Now, management of natural processes is actually an integral part of the peace-building process. Integrating nature-based solutions with the development programs offer sustainable, economically viable, and acceptable options to support resilience of infrastructure in urban and rural areas, livelihoods, water, health, and food security, and promote inclusivity. Bangladesh has its own experience of how nature-based solutions can offer social inclusion and economic prosperity, and I would love to share with you our experience. In our country's southern part, we have a large mangrove forest, the Sundarbans. It has a lot to offer when it comes to achieving SDGs and addressing poverty. It contributes millions of dollars to our economy through tourism, provides livelihood to hundreds of thousands of local community people, and saves millions of dollars in reconstruction and recovery by shielding the coastal areas from natural disasters. The Sundarbans of Bangladesh and India, you know that we share this natural heritage. So this represents a single ecosystem divided between these two countries. Both the countries recognize the need to monitor and conserve the Sundarbans, which is home to rich biodiversity consisting of large variety of rare species of flora and fauna. We recognize that this mangrove forest acts as a vital protective barrier, protecting the mainland from flooding, tidal waves, and cyclones. And most of the people living in this area depend heavily on these natural resources for livelihood, energy, biomass, medicinal plants, food supplies, in addition to receiving vital inputs and services to small-scale agriculture, including forage for livestock. Hence, Bangladesh and India signed an MOU in 2011 that provides us guidance to adopt appropriate joint management and monitoring of the resources, explore the possibility of implementing conservation and protection efforts, encourage mangrove regeneration, habitat restoration, and it also keeps the scope, it means MOU, the MOU keeps the scope for developing long-term strategy for creating ecotourism opportunities for both the countries, which ultimately will create synergy and generate greater revenue. This is actually an excellent example of using nature-based solutions in addressing drivers of instability, thus helping sustaining peace in communities and among the countries. I would also like to highlight that Bangladesh is currently the top troop contributing country in the UN peacekeeping missions. From its commitment to environmental management in peacekeeping missions, Bangladesh co-founded the Group of Friends for Leading Environmental Management in the field along with Italy. The group started its activities in February 2018 with the aim to raise awareness on the importance of managing environmental footprint of UN operations in the field. The group supports implementation of the environmental strategy of the UN launched by the Department of Operational Support in 2016, which is now being implemented. And Bangladeshi peacekeepers are supporting the implementation of the environmental strategy, including by engaging with the communities. We also encourage the use of jute and other fiber-based products as an alternative to plastics. Recently, Bangladesh has contributed a solar panel of 10 kWp capacity in the Bangladesh Construction Company site in Tomping, which is in Juba, South Sudan, and has been planning to have larger cooperation with the United Nations to support the transition to renewable sources of energy in the field operations. To conclude, failure to respond to the environmental needs of post-conflict societies can greatly complicate the already difficult tasks of peace, reconciliation, institutional building, and economic reconstruction. Decisions about the restoration and protection of natural resources have fundamental implications for short-term stability, long-term sustainable development, and therefore successful peace building. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanchita, for those remarks and for all the work, for highlighting the incredible work that Bangladesh is doing and contributing to the peacebuilding and peacekeeping efforts, not only in Bangladesh, but also around the world, and for also demonstrating the importance of partnership and collaboration through the work that you are doing with other countries, and to advocate for cleaner practices in peacebuilding as well. I think it's also really critical that we focus and look importantly at examples and successful cases where nature-based solutions are contributing positively in the peacebuilding phase. And so thank you for sharing those reflections, because I think we do need these national country level takes on these and looking at these particular case studies. So I'm looking forward to discussing this further with our panelists during the discussion as well. So thank you for your remarks again. Next, I would like to welcome Ulrika to join us, and Ulrika will be sharing with us a donor perspective on environmental peacebuilding, looking at challenges, opportunities in policy and decision making. Ulrika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar today. For us at SIDA, nature-based solutions is part and parcel of our environment work, and therefore also part and parcel of our environmental peacebuilding work. Important for us is also our 5 perspectives to be integrated into all of SIDA's work. Along with the environment perspective and conflict sensitivity, 3 other perspectives are to be integrated: the human rights-based approach, gender equality, and the perspective of people living in poverty. And a point of departure for us is that people living in poverty are agents and can express their needs, interests, and preconditions. And they are also rights holders with legal entitlements and can hold duty bearers accountable to comply with commitments, including international commitments and obligations within the fields of environment and peace. And for us, environmental strategies and actions need to take conflict sensitivity seriously, and peace processes and agreements need to integrate environment concerns. So what options do we see taking the work forward on environmental peace building and finding solutions? To start off with, the vision is for Stockholm Plus 50 coming up in June next year to promote international collaboration for accelerating a just and inclusive transition that leaves no one behind. And I think there is a potential for Stockholm Plus 50 to serve as a platform for driving implementation related to the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement and other international agreements like Women, Peace and Security and Youth, Peace and Security to steer towards development that reduce inequalities and benefit people living in poverty, conflict contexts and exposed to threats to human security. Another thing I wanted to mention is early warning signals of, for example, climate change as a risk multiplier for violent conflict that should trigger early preventive action. And I think this needs to go hand in hand with more locally led conflict sensitive action for environment and climate action, as well as environment and climate sensitive conflict prevention and peace building. And broad involvement of women and men who are most affected by climate change and biodiversity loss and conflict as agents of change may strengthen conflict sensitivity. Lastly, here on this slide, I wanted to also talk about agroforestry. I think agroforestry is one nature-based solution that we support a lot within CEDA's work and used for centuries to improve food security and livelihoods while sustainably managing ecosystems and their functions, such as biodiversity and ecosystem service delivery. And as an environmental peace-building intervention, it can support, for example, migrants and rural households by very concretely supporting knowledge of transfer, supporting incentives to invest in long and short-term agroforestry practices. It can create support for agroforestry investments and also incentives for land tenure insecure in migrating households. And it could also support in-migrant access to markets. So this is just one very concrete example. Lastly, another concrete example of what we are doing to support natural resource management, climate change and conflict combined. Within the scope of the core support to the International Peacebuilding Organization, International Alert, CEDA contributes to work that links natural resource management, climate change to conflict. International Alert specifically works on the global, regional, and local level with providing research and analysis of the interactions between environment, resource management, and conflict issues. And International Alert works cross-sectoral with environmental actors, where an example of this is the Water, Peace and Security Partnership. And I think this partnership has created an early warning tool on water conflicts that uses machine learning to predict where conflicts are likely to occur by analyzing patterns between violent conflict and more than 80 environmental and socioeconomic variables going back 20 years. And that's one very concrete example of where we see the interlinkages and what we need to see more support to. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. I think it's great that we're now, after unpacking the concepts and understanding the landscape, we're now really getting into concrete examples and thinking practically about applications of NBS to specific cases. So thank you for those examples. I think it offers us some great food for thought for our next segment. And finally, I would like to pass on to Caroline. And Caroline will be sharing with us some stories and voices of environmental defenders from across the world. Caroline, over to you.
So it's wonderful to be here. I've really been enjoying just listening and learning more about your work. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what I've been involved with in my capacity as a member of CESP, the Commission on Economic, Environmental and Social Policy at the Iucn. And I've been working heavily with a group of colleagues there on the topic of environmental defenders, and this topic has been touched upon a little bit by Elaine already. So I'll discuss a little bit about what we've been doing. First, I'll just give you a brief overview of what the current state of affairs is. In 2020, approximately 331 human rights and environmental defenders were killed. This is the largest number we've seen so far. And this number comes from frontline defenders, but it's also backed up by data from Global Witness. The vast majority of these defenders depend on land and the environment for their livelihoods. And the greatest threats come from the extractive industries. Over 30% came from mining specifically, but also logging, palm oil, large-scale agricultural expansion, but also conservation, enclosures, and enforcement. As I'm sure we all already know, that conservation can also create conflicts that that do pose a threat to local and indigenous communities. And that's something I think that through the nature-based solutions, that is something that I think we all want to target and look at more closely. So in terms of the work I've been doing with CESP, we recently launched a 3-volume special issue on the topic of environmental defenders. The first volume, Defenders and the Many Faces of Repression, focused on providing basically an overview of the current situation of defenders worldwide. We had contributions from environmental defenders themselves, but also scholars, activists, and also artists and poets. So it was quite an interdisciplinary mix of contributions. And on the cover of each of our issues, we have an environmental defender featured who was killed. So on the first volume, we feature Berta Cáceres, who was the founder of the Indigenous Organization of Honduras. And I wanted to include some information about her and also highlight my co-authors. Amayali Ramos and Philippe Lebion wrote the introduction to the first of the special issue. So on the second volume, we feature Hindu Umaru Ibrahim, who provided a really very strong call to action and provided 3 points that we need to look out for when we're discussing environmental defenders. And that's something I'll get to in just a second, realizing that. And on the cover of the second volume, we feature from South Africa an environmental defender who was killed for her activism against a coal mining initiative in South Africa. She was shot dead in her house for resisting this mining initiative. Almost all of these cases were very well documented. So the issue of environmental defenders and their resistance is becoming more and more well known to us. And the third volume features an environmental defender who was killed, and his death was linked to conservation. Actually, he was killed in Thailand because he trespassed into a conservation zone and he disappeared. His body was found a year later. It turns out that he was kidnapped by conservation authorities and later murdered. He was a very outspoken defender of the environment and the forest. So it's really, the issue is complex. It's happening on all sides of the spectrum. It's a really devastating situation, and there really is a call for action. During the COVID pandemic, the situation just became worse for defenders worldwide. So I think there is a greater need for more research to be done, to a case-by-case study, so that we can better understand what the situation is. So in terms of the call for action, and just to kind of get to the wrap up of this, Hindu Umaru Ibrahim contributed to our volume. Her calls for action are 3 points. The first, the criminalization of defenders must stop. She just says no one should be killed, assaulted, driven from the land of their ancestors, or simply marginalized for standing up for the most precious common good of life. We need dedicated support, resources, intelligence, and funding. Right now, for us, the defenders of the environment, resistance has but one name: action. To do this, we need to be given the means to act. And finally, climate policies and actions need to be more participatory from design to implementation, which means improving Indigenous participation in decision-making. And then finally, Manuela Peak, who is another environmental defender featured in our special issue, includes these three calls to action, which state that first, climate action must include human rights. So she's promoting very much a rights-based approach. In 2021, the representative of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change asked the United Nations to fully integrate the rights of Indigenous peoples in climate action in preparation for the COP26. The inclusion of human rights in climate change initiatives must be a top priority in climate negotiations and climate action. So second, international laws must be enforced so as to require at a minimum the free, prior, and informed consent of local communities for any land project, including conservation projects on Indigenous and local populations' territories, whether formal land title is held or not. And the consent must be given by Indigenous and local people for mining and other mega projects, as well as conservation. So and finally, we must learn to protect local communities' ways of life and their situated relationships with the environment in which they live, learning from their example so that they can continue to protect biodiversity through their own environmental management, knowledge transmission, and cultural values embedded in their languages and life ways. So these are my final thoughts on this complex situation on nature-based solutions and environmental defenders. These are, and this is where I'll wrap things up. Just coming from the WCC, I think that there are some things that we can highlight in terms of the nature-based solutions. One is the issue of value and accountability in the nature-based solutions discourse and narratives. I know within Iucn, as the concept of natural capital and offsets and the role of the private sector becomes more prevalent in Iucn, and within the nature-based solutions, the question of value comes up almost all of the time. I know that for local and Indigenous communities, this question of value and accounting and how do we value nature, this is very important to them as well. And so as nature-based solutions presses forward, I think it's important that we also remember not to, these values are not uniform and that there is room for diverse values of nature. And then FIPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, there is a tendency, and this was brought up in some of the sessions on nature-based solutions in the WCC, there is a tendency for FIPIC to be misused, where communities do not have the right to say no. And within this context, whether formal land title is held or not, if FIPIC is just used in order to, as a form of consultation to push projects forward, then it's not used properly. So I think we need to look out for that as well, these types of conciliatory mechanisms. And then finally, something that came as quite a big shock to me was that sometimes diverse stakeholders might use the same language of nature-based solutions, but they might mean different things. And yeah, okay. So for example, Jennifer Corpus was speaking in a session that I attended on nature-based solutions, and her comments were that she had some concerns about it, but then her comments were taken out of context the next day and highlighted by Iucn saying that let's recognize Indigenous peoples as a nature-based solution and keep on supporting them, making it sound as though she was supporting nature-based solutions. And so the meaning was shifted. So all of this to say that I think we need to consider the vast political, social, and economic power differentials that set the stage for these types of relationships that are occurring. And that's it. So thank you very much for listening and letting me share.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and apologies to rush you there. We have just about 20 minutes for discussion, and I'm eager to to get our panelists and all of you together for discussion with our audience, who have many questions for all of you. It's been a really enriching discussion, hearing from all of you thus far on the panel, and there are so many things to unpack. So I'm going to ask that we spend about 10 to 15 minutes on discussion. In fact, it might end up just being 10, so I allow a little bit of time for all your takeaway messages at the end. We already have some questions that have come in for some of our panelists, so I'm going to jump right in. And if you could please keep your responses as brief as possible so we can get a question at least to each of our panelists. So I'm going to ask my first question to you, Sanchita. And here I would like to ask you to reflect a bit further on what you believe can be done to strengthen endeavors to utilize nature-based solutions to facilitate peace building. So if you can capture in a couple of points in a minute or so some of these key areas that you believe should be the focus on work.
Thank you very much, Hannah. In fact, I think several issues require our active consideration to strengthen the endeavor to place nature-based solutions at the center of peace-building efforts. First, smart and sustainable natural resource management in social, environmental, and economic contexts can help prevent conflicts. Second, as you have seen from Caroline's presentation, that there are really many challenges. Even the human rights, even the defenders are losing their lives. They're sacrificing their lives to go for the cause of nature-based solutions. So rights of local people over natural resources must be recognized, and lack of such rights can have a significant contribution to recreating and accelerating tension and conflicts. Thus, even transitional authorities in partnership with national authorities need to ensure inclusivity, particularly of women, youth, indigenous people in all such institutional and legal processes. My third point is that UN and other international actors can help to bridge differing group perspectives and interests on managing natural resources in conflict and post-conflict areas. Fourth, UN Peacebuilding Commission, PBC, can support exchange of good practices regarding nature-based solutions through multi-stakeholder partnerships and networking. In this connection, the importance of building strong partnerships in support of national priorities must be emphasized. And finally, predictable and sustained financing is important for building and sustaining peace. Increased, sustained, and coordinated mobilization of finances, including through earmarking, is critical for creating awareness and capacity building for developing expertise in nature-based solutions. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanchita, for that response and for keeping it concise, but also packing in quite a bit into that response. Ulrika, next to you, could you let us know what you believe are future actions which donors should take to help take environmental peace building forward?
Well, I mentioned some of it in my points earlier, but I think I want to stress that unless systems and processes for peaceful management of competing interests and tensions are robust and relevant enough to deal with the difficulties in coping with climate change or loss of biodiversity, such tensions could contribute to fueling violence, especially when combined with inequality between groups. And also violent conflicts and riots cause human suffering and material destruction and pose a serious obstacle to human development, as well as potentially to progress in terms of environment action. And I think this means that environment strategies and actions need to take conflict sensitivity seriously, and making sure to minimize negative impact on conflict and maximize the positive impact on peace. And I think falling short of that means not only running the risk of doing harms in terms of undermining peace and fueling violence, but also undoing the results that environmental strategies sets out to achieve. And Conversely, peace processes and agreements need to integrate environment and climate concerns so that they contribute to building societies that are able to sustain peace in the face of challenges to human security caused by climate change and biodiversity loss. So that's my take on that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. Next to you, Alexis, and I apologize in advance. We would have loved to have more of a discussion across the panelists, but in the interest of time, I'll just be hopping from one panelist to the next with a focused question that has come through for each of you. So Alexis, to you, I mean, you spoke, and we've been having this discussion for a long time around the importance from the youth perspective of more transformative and inclusive education, overcoming the digital divide, overcoming linguistic barriers, advancing rights of indigenous communities, ethnic minorities. In the context of all of this, what, from the youth perspective and also from your perspective as a young professional in this field, so wearing both hats, in fact, what do you think is the way forward? How can nature-based solutions help in any way in advancing this work? And where do you see it going? I know there's some misinformation, misunderstandings also in terms of the definition of nature-based solutions, and we've had several conversations about this as well in the youth space. So where to from here in youth constituent groups to move this forward, and what's the potential for nature-based solutions here?
Well, thank you, Hannah. Well, I think that it's important to highlight that for all kind of solutions that we are trying to implement, it's important to respect and have inclusion. I think that, for example, there are many solutions that can be developed with many local communities. And we need to be aware that they already have so much knowledge to share. So I think this is an important point, because we need to hear these people that already have so many knowledge, be respectful. We want to develop that along or with them, not trying to impose our solutions, I think. And also to be aware that some ways of living from these communities, for example, that maybe can cause any kind of damage to the environment, or maybe it's not because they want to do that, and I'm sure it's not because they want to do that. It's because this is their local communities, they live from that, and we need to understand that they have their own local communities, their own ways of living, and we need to put both sides together to find a solution, but not to impose solutions. I think that's the most important thing if we want to advance in or to develop solutions for all.
Great, thank you so much, Alexis. I think that resonates with so many different communities, right? We don't want to be seen as imposing the solutions on them. So thank you for those reflections. Vim, I think this leads nicely into what you were discussing around broader actions for nature, coming from a perspective of an organization, working in the field with so many different organizations. Where do you see this agenda moving forward in the lead up to UNEA 5.2? What do you think the humanitarian perspective is on nature-based solutions? How do we advance nature-based solutions in the humanitarian sphere? How do we bring these communities together so that we're speaking the same language and understanding that there's potential and using the potential in a way that contributes positively to peace building?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. That's a very good question. I think first of all, it would be very helpful for organizations working on environment, peace and security, and humanitarian organizations to recognize the potential of nature-based solutions and broader actions for nature leading up to UNEA. And we already saw that in the discussions and contributions by the stakeholders group leading up to UNEA 5.1 and 5.2, where they expressed this need, in particular from conflict-affected areas in Asia, in Latin America, and from conflict-affected states. Next, there's now currently a draft resolution on nature-based solutions submitted, where there's also recognition of addressing environmental damage from conflicts to be addressed. So I think it's up to states to support this language, to strengthen this language in UNEA. We saw previously in other UNEAs where there were resolutions on protection of the environment, armed conflict, and mitigation of conflict pollution. I think this can build on that, and states can put funding and efforts towards looking how nature-based solutions or broader action for nature or eco-based disaster risk reduction in humanitarian operations, particularly linked with conflict areas, can be explored. And like I mentioned, like there's no blueprint for it, but if there's potential, there's like positive potential to make these changes, to not sit back and not wait until people take up this issue because they decide it's a priority, but to mainstream this into humanitarian response, to mainstream this in post-conflict reconstruction work, and recognize that environmental restoration, protection, and remediation and cleanup is key to the future for communities in post-conflict areas. And I think that's the main message we want to give to states and to international organizations leading up to UNEA next year, to support this through word and through deed, and into policy and also into practice. And I think it's a starting point in this conversation. So we're open to get input from other organizations, how to explore this and how to build out with a range of solutions, but at least now we have a horizon where we can build on.
Great, thank you so much, Vim, and thank you for all your efforts in this area to bring states to bring this to the attention of states and to really advocate for member states to take this on board through their in the lead up to UNEA and beyond. Next, I'd like to move to Elaine. Elaine, we would like to, you mentioned quite a bit the need for nature-based solutions to be conflict sensitive as well as conflict transformative to build peace, and highlighting that there's a need for these new capacity building mechanisms for cross-cultural collaborative problem solving. So all these tools and skills that need to be developed in organizations embarking on nature-based solutions to make sure that they are successfully implemented. And a question to you is that came from one of our participants is, what part of the system do you see these capacities being of most importance, and who would be delivering this capacity building? So in the context of a nature-based solutions initiative, in terms of the project design, I suspect, where do you see these capacities being most needed, and who would be the ones that we reach out to deliver this type of capacity building?
Okay, thanks, Hannah. That's a good question. I think it's probably the most important part of this whole conversation is how do we actually operationalize all the things that we're talking about. And I think, you know, that in terms of where does it sit in the system, it needs to be all across, embedded in every aspect from the very get-go. And sometimes that includes whether or not the person or the people who are developing the nature-based solution have a conversation, kind of a very honest one between themselves as well as with the people and the partners in the places that they're trying to work about whether they're the ones who need to be delivering the intervention in the first place. I think, you know, this needs to happen in places where there is ongoing armed conflict. These are places where the protection of the environment today in that moment is going to matter for whether or not that those natural resources in the environment can play a role in the post-conflict peace-building processes. It also, you know, there are a lot of conservation organizations and local communities who are working, sometimes engaging with armed actors out of necessity, and we're not trained for that typically in the conservation world. People also who are supporting those actors on the ground need this kind of support. And the donors and the media, you know, the ways that these conflicts and the dynamics are being presented to the rest of the world, it's important, you know, and whether or not this gets factored into the project's indicators and measures of success are important. And it's not typically there. It's not there in almost any of the Iucn measures of success in terms of projects on the ground. And who should be doing this? I think, you know, this is a question for each of us who wear the hat of environmentalist or conservationist. We need to be thinking about where are we lacking in peace building and conflict resolution skills, and to look for the capacity building that we need to get there. And I think that also needs to happen at the level of our organizations and institutions. It needs to happen, you know, through the partnerships that I think Shanchita mentioned. You know, this is an incredibly important part. The growing network of partnerships that we have with conventional or contemporary peace builders. Those are people we can look to who have been practicing the skills on the ground, but also the local communities. And I know this was also mentioned. I've learned so much about, you know, thousands years old practices of environmental peace building from communities in places on the ground that are confronting these issues every day. And I think this is also, we can see now expanding into the curricula in academic and university programs. I'm now at Kent State School of Peace and Conflict Studies, and I teach environmental conflict resolution. So this is now, you know, there and embedded in the programs of students, and it could be part of, you know, a core requirement for environmental studies. And I think these are the many ways that we can kind of look to develop the capacity building or conflict transformation and conservation for nature-based solutions.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Clearly, much more to be discussed on this. And as you mentioned, such a critical component is to identify and figure out really where the capacity is and who develops the capacity and in what form. And so thank you for sharing those insights. We can have many more conversations around this in future discussions, hopefully. Finally, over to you, Carl. Several questions, but I only have time, unfortunately, for one, which came in from a participant who was very interested to hear about the topic of avoidance, which you mentioned, one of the strategies, avoidance for project implementation. And this is quite common around climate teams. We find a lot of projects implemented which include risk avoidance, which sorts of beats the purpose if you're working in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. So in these contexts, how do you then, these program teams, ensure avoidance is not their go-to strategy? And how is environmental peace building working to address this issue? So that's the two-part question for you. If you can briefly respond to those two.
Thank you for the question. I think the short answer is it's hard to ensure that they don't do it. I think it's the most important thing, I think, is to educate people about why avoidance might not be a good strategy. If you and I think it has to do with what are your objectives. If your objectives are biodiversity conservation or making sure that forests aren't cut down to mitigate climate change, whatever it is, that you have to go where the resources are. You have to engage. And so, yes, avoidance is a strategy, but there are other strategies that we have seen work. And so I think there's a lot of education. I mean, frankly, I would rather not be shot at, but you know, sometimes, and it's hard to say, no, you have to go there and put your life at risk. This is very hard to say that because the biodiversity is there, we have to send other people into the danger zone. I think there are ways that we can, and so some cases it may be really not feasible and you have to avoid, but I think we need to reduce the use of that by focusing on what are our objectives here and are there other strategies other than avoidance, such as risk mitigation.
Great, thank you so much, Carl. Finally, to Caroline, environmental defenders, and you spoke really powerfully and really moved us with your words about the reflections and the voices from the various environmental defenders who are featured in the publications that you now have out. How do you see, from your reflections with them and discussions, how do you see nature-based solutions and the global standard trying to help achieve these calls to action from the environmental defenders? And what do you see as potential gaps? I mean, you outlined several of the gaps during your last slide, but do you see any potential here to help achieve these calls to action, nature-based solutions and the standard? builds into it inclusivity and cross collaboration across these different actors, and a focus on looking at local actors to find solutions and to be involved from the design phase. So do you see there's being some potential here to achieve these calls to action of the environmental defenders through nature-based solutions?
Yes, thank you, Hannah. Indeed, I think that if we recognize that the environmental defenders are really on the front lines defending their environment, and when we talk about conflict, these are the people experiencing violence and conflict on a daily basis in very different ways that might be very different forms of violence, but I think it's important that we recognize the challenges, but also the potential benefits, as you say, and as also Elaine pointed out, there is some potential for partnership, and as you said, if we can try to involve these partners, local and indigenous groups, from design to implementation, and think about maybe new avenues for indigenous-led conservation. I'm thinking, I was inspired when Elaine mentioned that including into like even academic curricula, new ways of thinking about nature-based solutions. I think this just education and all of this points us in the right direction. So what's of major concern when I think we think about environmental defenders is just how are nature-based solutions being implemented. And so that's where that's a major gap, I think, that we need to pay attention to. But the nature-based solutions could, through these partnerships, these innovative design and implementation opportunities, we could find ways in which we could work together through diverse stakeholder constellations and relationships to find ways for greater protections. I'm seeing all sorts of new relationships forming, multidisciplinary relationships, and these are the kinds of partnerships I think we need in order to change this situation. So these are just some thoughts, but thanks.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. And I know I put you on the spot a little bit there, but thanks, Caroline. And starting with you, as we move into our quick takeaways, since we are at the 3:30 mark, I'm going to ask all of you if you could please, we would love to have your takeaways, but we will just be brief if you can, keep it to 30 seconds. That would be fantastic. So back to you, Caroline, if there are any key takeaway messages for the audience you'd like to share in 30 seconds.
The global situation of environmental defenders is one of the most important topics today. Nature-based solutions is being promoted globally as one of the top solutions that we should be paying attention to, but we absolutely must consider the fact that we've had more deaths of environmental defenders in 2020 than any other year. And for this, we need new global partnerships and greater attention to the people on the front lines. So, thanks.
Thank you, Caroline. Ulrika, over to you.
Thanks. I'll try to be very quick. I think the untapped potential in peace building to contribute to protecting the environment and combating climate change, that needs to be further explored, as well as the potential in environmental work to contribute to peace, positive environmental and climate action is really needed. And this potential, I think, could be pushed by strengthening collaboration across sectors in conflict context and to reduce the risk of conflict and minimize its impact and harness environmental peace building. So that's my last word. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Ulrika. Elaine?
Yeah, I would just say that, it's pretty obvious that what we need to do is to transition from going from conflict-afflicted environments and hopefully somewhat sensitive, conflict-sensitive conservation to nonviolent and conflict transformative conservation. And that means that peace building needs to become an integral part of the practice and the culture of conservation, building nonviolence and peace processes overtly into nature-based solutions and through its operationalization and the capacity building of its actors.
Fantastic, thank you. Shanchita?
Thank you, Hannah. From today's discussion, what I understand and what needs to be really focused by us is that natural resources and peace, these are complementary, and there must be legal and administrative systems in place to protect the defenders, environmental defenders, and also there must be inclusivity in the whole arrangement so that the peace building and natural resources, these issues are really seriously addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Vim?
Yeah, I think as a key takeaway, I would say like the international community must work to limit the acute and long-term environmental impacts of wars, and actions for nature, including nature-based solutions, can be a constructive part of these efforts to prevent and to mitigate, minimize, and remediate those impacts. And not only will they support environmental restoration efforts that better protect civilians, addressing the environmental dimensions of armed conflict, including by using nature-based solutions, is also elementary in building resilience to the compounding impacts of the climate crisis in conflict-affected states, and we're looking forward to engage with everyone who is interested in this leading up to Geneva and beyond to incorporate and develop those ideas.
Thank you, Vim. Alexis?
Yeah, well, I would like to finalize by saying that youth of today, we are living with the challenges of increased water scarcity and other challenges, but also we will continue living for many, many years with that. So in the near future, we will also be the leading decision makers for handling of these challenges. From here, it is important that the importance of governments, private entities, international organizations, and other kind of organizations can support youth initiatives to push them not from this consultation area to co-decision making processes. Also, I would like to highlight that please, we need to be open and be inclusive in each and every project that we are trying to develop. We need to be open to receive different kind of knowledge. So let's create this safe space for all people. And I would like to finalize by saying that in trying to develop this inclusion, just to mention that the Geneva Peace Platform is also developing a consultation for a white paper in environmental peace building in Spanish. And I'm happy for that. And it will be the 15th of November. So if you know young people, leaders, and all people that will be happy to share their experiences and knowledge in Spanish for this consultation, please invite them. And also I invite you to read all the other policy briefs that my amazing colleagues wrote after the Global Youth Summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And for all of you, just to know, we will be dropping links and sharing all the resources that all the panelists have been mentioning, and also links to various initiatives so you can get involved and join consultations as well. Thank you, Alexis, for mentioning that. And finally, Carl, for your takeaway messages.
I think the most interesting thing for me is, well, I will say that seeing the visual of what are nature-based solutions, what are the standards, that was really helpful, because there are a lot of people talking about nature-based solutions without having a common frame of reference. And I think this goes to some of the questions around language. And so I think getting that framing out there would really help. we talked about a number of different approaches: building back better, managing debris, livelihoods, conflict transformation, nature-based solutions to reduce displacement. But I think what I think is most important is not what is the solution. What we've been talking about, almost every person here, what we've probably talked about is how do we go about the nature-based solutions? And I think that's important to reflect on, that whatever solution you're talking about, we need to make sure that's inclusive. Inclusive of indigenous communities, youth, gender, local people, ethnic minorities, language. I appreciate the fact that we are speaking in English, but if we want to make this work, we need to figure out solutions. And I think that goes to something that hasn't been said so much, which is, where are the resources for this? Because I think that it's very easy for us to say, we need to be inclusive. We need to protect people from retaliation. We need to be speaking the same language. But there are very real resource constraints. And I think that the question that I would have as we think about how we move forward is, how do we actually make this work? How can we be inclusive? How inclusive? And how do you manage all the different voices who want different outcomes? What does inclusion mean? Does it mean consulting, hearing, thinking about what is said? Does it mean that you do what they want? Is it co-design? And I think the short answer is, it depends on the context. There are, it's more that there are different tools, and we will, sometimes it will be co-design. Sometimes it will be more just consultation. But I think that one of the things we need to do is to do better, even if we can't do perfect, and keep trying to do better. The final thing that I would say is there are lots of opportunities to continue this discussion. One is the second International Conference on Environmental Peacebuilding. I put the link in the chat, and this is a hybrid event. It will be in Geneva for those who are able to join us February 2nd through 4th, 2022. See you in Geneva. For those who are not able to join us, there will also be a hybrid event with opportunities to share online. Second event is UNEA 5.2, which Vim highlighted, which I think is very important in this space. And third, which nobody talked about, is Stockholm Plus 50. And I think that integrating environment, nature-based solutions, and peace and peace building is going to be very important as we reflect on the last 50 years of sustainable development and look toward the future. And I think we need to get this on everyone's radars. We need to get people planning, thinking about how do we take advantage of what is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. So thank you all. Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you for summarizing and capturing all the questions I had written down to ask as follow-up questions as well in my reflection. So thank you so much. I think the inclusivity resonates across the panelists. The key touch points moving forward are critical for us to remember as moving this discussion ahead. There's so much to be done, but this was a great start to our discussion. And as Carl, you were speaking, Caroline also dropped a note in the comment, also very importantly, to add to our list of questions to think about as we move forward is who has ownership of the concept of NBS and when and over whom. And I think all this critically needs unpacking. I'm very glad you mentioned that it was useful for you to see the visuals around NBS. And I think from our part, at least at Iucn, we're working to and will continue working with all of you and with other partners to really get the knowledge out there and to share what we have developed around NBS, but also to take it forward collaboratively, working with stakeholders and partners from around the world to see how we truly land NBS in a meaningful way, for whom, and how, which you really highlighted in terms of the process questions that are very critical and outstanding as a next step and for a future dialogue, I hope. So with that, I will, as we are quite over time and we have the opening of the Geneva Peace Week coming up soon, the official opening ceremony, I will hand over to Diana for some last comments. I would like to thank you all once again for joining. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for starting to unpack this discussion and conversation around nature-based solutions. Clearly, there is great potential here. We do need to continue figuring out the how, the process around it, the financing, and continue engaging with stakeholders from across governance levels and including constituent groups from around the world to ensure that their voices are heard as well. So on that note, I will pass back to Diana.
Thank you very much, Anna. Let me also thank you for having moderated very well this event. Thank you all our panelists, but also the attendees. Today we were competing with the opening of the Glasgow Conference of the Parties on Climate, and also with the public holiday in many countries. So thank you all for being with us, and also for those who will be watching this video later on. And you mentioned there's the opening ceremony of the Geneva Peace Week in a few minutes. So it's starting at 4 p.m. Geneva time, which is in about 16 minutes. And I encourage you all to follow the opening ceremony, but also to follow various events that will be taking place later this week that will focus on the nexus on environment and peace building. With that, I would also like to invite you to mention that the next session of this series on nature-based solutions is taking place on the 22nd of November, and it will focus on water, and we hope to see you all back that week. Thank you all, and with that, we are closing this session.